What's up, Instafam? My name is Frank Reynolds, and welcome to the latest Instagram book review series, Is It Worth It?, where I do all the hard work for you and take a look at some modern and not so modern, speculative, and thriller novels, letting you know if they're worth your time. Today we're going to start with a not so well-known series from an independent author that might deserve more attention than it's getting. That is Jenna Moreci's The Saviors series, specifically the companion duo The Saviors Champion and the recently released Saviors Sister. I really am excited about these two novels because they take a concept presented in the Hunger Games and give it to a more mature audience with a dark fantasy twist. The Saviors Champion is one of my favorite books from 2018. It follows Tobias as he enters what is known as the Saviors Tournament to win the hand of the Savior, who is supposed to marry the winner of this tournament, a tournament that is fought to the death. However, his goal is not to win the Savior's affection, rather it is... No. Perks of trying to film a new book review series while potty training a puppy. Also, I know that it's extremely bright outside. I'm going to look like a jug of milk. I'm going to need to film these at a different time of day. The Saviors Champion really was one of my favorite books because, like I said, it took what the Hunger Games presented in a YA format and gave it to us from an adult perspective, which to me is how a tournament where kids are killing each other would probably go. This book right here presents some epic twists, both in the middle of the story and at the end of the story, that paint the fantasy genre in an entirely different light from anything we've seen before. Jenna Moreci really was able to capture the spirit of a dark fantasy tale while also capturing the spirit of a romance within one relatively succinct story that paved the way for plenty of future installments. When she announced that she was going to be releasing a companion novel to The Saviors Champion in The Saviors Sister, I was relatively surprised at the time, but after thinking about it, it made a lot of sense given the way that some of the characters progressed in the first story and knowing where it had to go moving forward. And after reading The Saviors Sister, I've come to realize that while necessary, The Saviors Sister definitely does not have the sort of pull The Saviors Champion did when we don't know the story at hand. Writing a companion novel can be extremely difficult when people already know what's going to happen. The Saviors Sister does do a good job at introducing some new concepts. It does do a good job at exploring characters introduced in The Saviors Champion and giving them a little bit of extra life, but where it's lacking is in the gut-punching twists that The Saviors Champion was able to introduce. Again, we know what's going to happen at the end of The Saviors Sister, so the way that Moreci moves the story forward in a progressive manner is impressive, but it is still not quite as compelling as The Saviors Champion, and I don't know that it was ever intended to be. Listening to Moreci's interviews, she was more excited to get to the third novel of the series than she was to write this second novel, but the way that the first novel is laid out, it does make the third novel's premise much more interesting and captivating if she adds a companion novel between the two. I do have a couple of issues with the Saviors series, particularly The Saviors Sister in general. Jenna Moreci really loves cocks. The word cock. The word cock is said about 6 trillion times in the book. It's like she makes it a point to let us know these men are equipped with their genitalia. I would have liked her to back down a little bit in that regard. Something else I wish Moreci would have done in The Saviors Sister that isn't exactly touched on is the world outside of our main kingdom. There are different areas in this universe introduced in the second novel that aren't thoroughly explored. They're rather teased. I can assume that she's doing this so that these regions are explored in future novels, but the tease is never paid off here. That was a little frustrating at the end of the story. It leads to a promise that feels unfulfilled. One thing I will say The Saviors Sister does extremely well is pace the novel appropriately. The tasks and challenges that are a part of the Saviors Tournament are expertly paced to a point where we are never feeling like the challenges are lagging, especially because they aren't told from Tobias's point of view as they are in the first novel. It was something I was a little bit worried about, and she does a really good job at showing these obstacles through another lens that gives us a different perspective on the Savior's Tournament, which again is the main conflict in these two novels. There's a secondary conflict that is also present, particularly in the Savior's Sister, that I will not give away for spoiler-related purposes. It's a pretty obvious obstacle that you'll understand probably about 20 or 30 pages into the Savior's Sister. I wish that we didn't hit the nail on the head so often with it. I feel like we were kind of beating a dead horse after a while, and the motivations behind doing so are never made particularly clear to us. Again, I'm hoping that that is something that the future novels, specifically the third novel, addresses. I do think that Moreci gives some detail and reason as to why she is headed in this direction. It just didn't work for me, as well as some of the motivations of the characters in the first novel. Overall, I really would recommend this series. Probably nitpicking a little bit more than I should be here when it comes to the Savior's Sister, but that is just because the Savior's Champion was so fantastically done. Again, it was one of my favorite reads. I would have recommended it to anybody looking for a Hunger Games-esque story told with a darker twist that involves an element of fantasy and magic. Also would recommend it to fans of romance novels who would like to see those types of stories woven into fantasy more often. This one is really expertly done, and The Savior's Sister is absolutely an admirable companion to that story, a companion that is necessary for the third novel, which will be forthcoming in the next few years, I assume, and will absolutely make that novel better and a true sequel to the first story. One last consideration is reading these two novels back to back. Having a 2-year gap between my experience in finishing The Savior's Champion and starting The Savior's Sister did leave me a little bit puzzled for the first 50 pages or so in trying to remember specific details and characters, but you do pick it up after a while. However, I could definitely imagine this being a more enjoyable read and more on par with the first story had I done them back to back. Thanks so much for tuning in for the very first episode of Is It Worth It? In my opinion, definitely is. Check out The Savior's Champion, and if you love it, The Savior's Sister will absolutely be worth your time. I definitely look forward to the third novel, the title of which was just announced a few weeks back, though I will not spoil it here because that is something that I'm really working on not doing. Instead, you can always check out Jenna Moreci's YouTube channel or newsletter for any more updates related to The Savior's Champion or Savior's Sister. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.